to the land. So this is one of the basically the footprint of what that one tower was. It's a 90-foot drop, and then it goes looking basically in front of it in the centre. So the names on here are the names of all the people in this tower.
Now, this picture was taken in November, and the stairs were still in good condition. Obviously, something happened to damage the stairs. And that was done much later in the cleanup. But for those people who used it on September 11th, they said, we don't care. Bring it into the museum. And it wasn't until 2008 we had a place to put it. We had a foundation. We had a place to put it. The very first item they brought into this museum were these stairs. We didn't even have a roof overhead. A special crane picked up 58 tons of staircase. Now, we didn't open our doors until 6 years later, in May of 2014. So these stairs saw the whole place get built up around it.
It does not have ashes in it, it's just a ceremonial urn. And at the top of the lid, it has all the words from the speech of President George W.H. Bush at the time, the words to comfort the country. It is an artist concept where he wanted to commemorate the victims. So they took pictures of, they asked the families for pictures of their lost family members. And then this artist
Standards and technology are eager to find pieces of steel like this to help explain the reasons for buildings collapse and how the buildings performed in that collapse. They came to the conclusion that the Twin Towers collapsed for three main reasons. The first two are obvious if you've seen pictures like that or if you've seen this footage in the event. First is the massive amount of structural damage caused by the impact. Like I said, the hijacked 767 impacted the Twin Towers, removing about 450 miles per hour, 450, 550 miles an hour. Severed a lot of columns both on the facade and the interior of the buildings. The second factor is also obvious, and that is massive fire. The 4 flights that the hijackers chose were all fully fueled transcontinental flights at the beginnings of the runs. They did that on purpose to cause the biggest possible fire. In the case of the two 767s that struck the buildings, they were both carrying around about 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. Now the third factor is a little bit more subtle. It's kind of a combination of the other two factors, and it's crucial to explain the reason why the buildings collapsed, because the fire and the structural damage alone are not enough to bring the towers down. There was enough redundancy in place to keep the South Tower standing for 56 minutes, North Tower standing for 102 minutes despite the damage and fire. What really brought the towers down was time plus the loss of fireproofing. So not only did the aircraft impacts destroy the building's sprinkler systems, but it also destroyed the building's passive fireproofing, by which I mean there's a spray-on fireproofing applied to the steel when the towers were built, about 3 inches thick. It was designed to protect the steel from an office fire. This most easily envisioned emergency the towers were going to face, and they never envisioned terrorist hijackings, flying planes into buildings. It was not designed to withstand an impact. So when aircraft struck the building, the fireproofing was literally blown off the steel. Fires were allowed to heat the steel directly. Fires were hot, something around, I believe, 1600 degrees Fahrenheit or so. It is not hot enough to melt steel. That's a popular misconception. It was kind of spread around in the media immediately after the event. No, steel does not melt, that is liquefy at that temperature, but it does lose its structural strength. In other words, it becomes bendable at a much lower temperature. So if you can imagine the floors and the remaining columns that they're attached to, as the fires heat the floors up, they want to sag under their own weight, kind of like a hammock. As they do, they want to pull the columns that they're attached to inwards towards the middle of the building. So those bending columns, in the case of the North Tower, had to support 20 floors of office building above them. It was completely unaffected by the impact of fires. There's only so much bending those columns can take before one floor collapses. Now you essentially have a 20-floor office building in free fall on top of the remaining floors underneath. The remaining floors underneath cannot stop that motion. Basically, that meant the top of the building pulverized each floor below it as it went. What this called a progressive collapse or progressive failure, and ultimately the loss of both towers in around about 10 seconds. Which is why the South Tower, just struck by hijacked United Flight 175 second, collapsed first. The reason for that basically is that the South Tower struck about 20 floors lower in the building, so those bending columns had to support 40 floors instead of just the 20. It was also struck about 100 miles per hour faster, which increased the amount of structural damage.
So you're just saying that's just the original foundation of the fire. I don't know if you can see, but we're kind of in a box part here, and this is actually underneath the memorial pools right now. So the pools, the base of the pools is right above our heads. I can't take any photography or video in this room, but I just wanted to show you it's a very emotional room. So I'm going to show you just a little part of it, and you see all those pictures there, they're actually victims' pictures, and it goes all the way around, wraps, and in the middle, they have a video with each one telling their story with photos and their family members talking about them. So actually a party that was placed outside a firehouse where they lost 15 firefighters, and people started leaving flags and mementos at the firehouse, and all those mementos are here on the Statue of Liberty to commemorate. This is a type of rock called schist, and I put it under skyscrapers to support the skyscrapers. I don't know if you can see, but they're super shiny, like sparkly, and this was brought up from underneath the building. It's a keychain that was given to the people who built the tower, the iron workers, in 1970 when the original Twin Towers were finished. Each of them was given this commemorative.
So, when the towers were built, the elevator scheme was very important in the planning of the buildings. They were planned to be home to about 50,000 people, so the World Trade Center complex was a mini city into its own right. In fact, it was given its own postal code. Moving that many people throughout these buildings was a high priority. You had to figure out a very efficient way of doing that. When they came up with, for each of the 99 elevators in the building, they were organized on a system kind of like the subway here in New York City. You had express and locals. You had an express elevator that would take you to a third or two-thirds of the way the building to what they called sky lobbies on 44 or 78. From there, you would take your local to your specific office floor. So it was not only very efficient because you weren't stuck in an elevator car with people getting off at every single floor between 100 and 110. Also for the landlords, you got the benefit that you could stack the local elevators on top of each other, which cut down on the number of elevator shafts you need, which increased your floor space, which meant more money. So a very efficient, very pioneering system for the time, a little bit more commonplace these days. And as you might imagine, had a pivotal role to play in 9/11. Now 9/11 is the world's worst elevator disaster. It's estimated about 200 people lost their lives in elevators, either because of damage to the cars themselves or because they couldn't escape from stopped cars. However, it is important to remember that there was a 17-minute gap in between the impacts of the North and South Towers. So the people in the South Tower had that 17-minute advantage over those in the North to use those very efficient elevators to get out, and it's one of the reasons why we had many fewer civilian casualties in the South Tower than we did in the North. And we do have stories of people who managed to get out of stopped cars. The one we like to tell here at the museum is of Jan Demser. He was a window washer heading to his workstation in the North Tower. He was riding an express car. When in 1846, the elevator car he's riding in suddenly shudders, stops, begins to drop, and unfortunately stops again. He managed to get it stopped. So he and the other 5 guys in the elevator car kind of waiting around. There's no word forthcoming from the loudspeaker. When smoke starts filtering into their elevator car, they start thinking about trying to get out. So Demser, as a window washer, has 3 tools in his trade on him. He's got a bucket. Unfortunately, no use for that. They tried the roof hatch, it was locked. He's got a long pole. They use that to prop open the doors. They prop open the doors, they're faced with a large piece of sheetrock with a spray painted 50 on it. Their elevator is not designed to stop at the 50th floor. Fortunately, Demser had some prior construction experience and knew that sheetrock will chip if you score it first, so they used his last remaining tool, the squeegee, and the squeegee blade, and they begin to chip and score the sheetrock. They had to get the 3 layers of the stuff. At one point, they lost the blade of the squeegee down between the floor of the elevator and the elevator shaft, so they just got the handle of the squeegee in their fists. They eventually hit tile. They punched through the tile and they find themselves on a men's bathroom on the 50th floor, and luckily with no obstructions on the other side of that wall. So they eventually made that hole wide enough to squeeze themselves through, and Demser and the other 5 guys did make it out of that car and down the remaining flights of stairs just before the North Tower collapsed. So they didn't make it home to their families. If you guys are sticking...
There's the fire truck up and you can see how the damage every single member of the Okay, so I couldn't take you inside everywhere because some places they don't allow you to take photography. But the one I just got out of, very large, had a lot of primary source things, had pieces of the planes that hit the World Trade Center, pieces of the plane that hit the Pentagon, pieces of police cars and fire helmets, and all these very personal effects from the World Trade Center. So that's one of the reasons I guess you need to come here and see this incredible museum and all the information it has. It also had lots of video inside of firefighters talking about going in there, videos before they rushed in the building, some fire trucks, ambulances. So it was a very emotional spot once again, but they do not allow any photography in there or videotaping, so I could not share that part with you. Sorry. Survivor tree, this one we found out about in the video. So it was badly burned. They discovered it afterwards.